So, hello and welcome to my presentation. I'm deeply sad about the fact that I cannot present my talk live, but unfortunately, due to technical issues, I had to pre-record this. Regardless, I hope that this will be both interesting and informative to anyone who is listening. And without any further ado, I will go right into it. So my talk will be introducing the many phases of code switching, and more exactly, I will be hoping to answer or give insight as to why is it that we mix languages? Why is there a switching happening? Before I actually talk about code switching and why we do it and how we do it, a little bit about myself as well. My name is Mari-Liis. I'm from Estonia. I'm currently a PhD linguistics student at the University of Tartu. Code switching is one of the things that I am researching right now. And my primary interest is in Swedish-Estonians. And you will see a couple of examples from the data set that I had collected 2 years ago. So hopefully this will be interesting. And I have two native languages. I speak both Estonian and Russian as my native language. And growing up as a bilingual, I felt very, very connected to this whole identity. And this was maybe one of the reasons why I actually decided to pursue a degree in linguistics, and why I am aiming to become a linguist, a proper linguist one day. So I believe that if there is a person who is deeply interested in languages, and maybe not just for fun, but would actually like to do something bigger, then I highly recommend you to study linguistics at the university. But moving on, so what is code switching? How do we define it? So in this talk, I will talk in a very simplistic way. It's obviously a lot more complex. There's a lot more sides to it, but the simplest way of explaining what this is to use more than one language or dialect within either an entire conversation or just a mere utterance. So this whole process is labeled as code switching. There is a strong belief, which is kind of a chicken and the egg type of situation. There are divisions among linguists whether this applies, but in this context, I will say that language systems should be and can be located separately in the brain. There is also a theory on the integrated system, but at the moment, this will not be a relevant point to lead on to. So, due to the fact that languages are somehow separated in our brain, we activate these systems according to our needs, according to the context, according to the surrounding environment and overall situation. And this tendency triggers us to use multiple languages. And code switching over time has changed. It used to be something that people discriminated. It was viewed as something negative, although even in nowadays context, we cannot fully claim that it is something that is viewed with much positivity. There are still, unfortunately, communities where people who mix between languages are viewed with a negative undertone. But regardless, as a whole, these attitudes have changed towards multilingualism. And due to these changes, more and more research has emerged and more awareness has emerged that this is not simply due to the lack of knowledge or some intellectual issues. This is actually a normal part of our everyday life, of our everyday interactions. And linguists primarily divide into two, I would say, groups when it comes to code switching researches. One is the grammatical side, the grammatical approach. They're interested mostly on how this happens, how we switch, how we integrate one language into the other, how we borrow all these elements. So more of the structural side. And then there's this socio-pragmatic approach who explain why is this happening, why is it that when we have such a large linguistic repertoire, and we have so many variants that we can access to self-express, why is it that in this particular moment we choose to say the things this specific way, how we said it. And we can also divide code switching into two types, simply put. One occurs within the other. And so when we are integrating maybe a minor language, but not the main language of the conversation, when we're integrating an element into the sentence structure. So in this example, this is a Russian-Estonian example, na ulitse külmovато. So na ulitse and all of the Kirillitsa parts are in Russian. Külm stands for cold in English, so the translation is it's a bit cold outside. But by saying külm, you kind of want to even emphasize that this is cold. But you can also be because you are used to talking about the weather, for example, in Estonian. And oftentimes in this type of code switching, we are just integrating elements and conjugating actually according to the linguistic rules of another language. Usually this is the main language of the conversation. And then there's this type of code switching which occurs throughout the conversation and across utterances. So this is when we say an entire sentence in one language, but the following utterance or sentence is in another language. Mostly, especially in our current event context, the good example would be of greeting each other in different languages. So this can be considered as one single utterance or even sentence. So now that we know how this approximately happens, we're still wondering, why is it that we do it? Where does this come from, this need? So code switching is, as I pointed out before, it's very essential. It's a very important part of our everyday interaction. And it is pretty hard to believe that there's anyone out there who is completely monolingual. At least bilingual is most of the world's population. And even if we don't speak more than one native language, especially in the English-speaking countries, regardless, we are exposed to so many languages through media, books, situations, through traveling, through work, through everyday interactions. It is practically impossible to isolate yourself from this linguistic variation and just stay in this monolingual bubble. And due to this exposure and due to the fact how much we interact and how much we move around, we are exposed, and we will start using one way or another elements from other languages that are not our native languages. And there is a lot of research done on finding all these patterns and finding all these functions that code switching carries. And this list can go on, and they can be recategorized in different ways. But I will talk about some of the main points that have been noted by researchers. So one of the triggering factors, which causes code switching, are speakers themselves. So let's just imagine that there's a situation where we're in a group and we would like to exclude someone from the group, from the specific conversation. So we switch. So this can be by excluding on purpose, maybe not even for negative reasons, but we are excluding someone by using a language that they do not understand. And the other opposite situation would be to include someone. So someone joins the conversation, and before that we might have spoken one language, but now that this person added and we want them to understand what we're saying, so we're switching, or we are again using some phrases that they might understand. And again, in a group situation, through excluding and including, we can also just address someone specific and refer to them. And not just the speakers themselves impact how we are talking. The other two things are the role that a speaker carries or the activity that a person does. Oftentimes, our positions rotate when we're, especially in a large conversational group. I would say the best example in this case comes from academia. So let's imagine that we're talking to another student. We're talking in one way, but now that there's a lecturer joining our conversation, um, our status dynamics change. I will become more inferior, and through that I will express this linguistically. There are better examples, obviously, and this can be also quite a negative thing in some societies, but I will not stop on this for too long. Languages also have different statuses across countries. And one good example is when you are a minority language speaker and you live in another country, which is not maybe not even the country where you were born at, and where the majority language isn't your native language, then in those situations, when you're in a work situation, you might use something else other than what you're using in your home environment. So this kind of activity change or environment change can cause code switching. But also when we are doing something more harmless, for example, playing language games, we might switch between languages. When we're watching movies, especially with which are foreign and which have subtitles, this kind of situation can trigger us to switch between languages. So either way, this can be voluntary or involuntary. It completely depends on the situation and context. Once the topic changes, it can also be a triggering factor for switching between codes or languages. This type of switching is or can be translated as a reference. We are referencing something. For example, if you're used to talking about a certain topic, you're semantically associating one code with something else. There is a semantic representation of that code. And that is why you start switching. For example, in my personal experience, when I was learning Swedish, I first learned to speak Swedish in a linguistic context because I got it. My first degree was in linguistics and was taught in Swedish, so my entire vocabulary was linguistics related. And whenever I would later on study linguistics or attend courses that were taught in English or Estonian, I would struggle to find the proper words of describing my ideas because I was just used to doing this in Swedish. And this again shows that sometimes we have a linguistic or language preference around a certain topic, and we're more used to talking about that. And that is why oftentimes people are misinterpreted and believe that they don't know the language, they have poor skills, their vocabulary is limited. It is limited, but it's not limited in a way that one language is bigger or larger in the size of their vocabulary than the other. It just means that we are used to using this language in a different context. Language is also a powerful tool for self-expression. So when we want to emphasize a message, oftentimes we will switch and say this emphatic part of the message in a different language. We might just refer to it and point it out that it is an important piece of information in our overall message. And we are also using this to express our emotions, our happiness, our frustrations, and of course swearing. Who doesn't like swearing in a foreign language? And a fun thing also for code switching is to give out comments. So when we're quoting someone, imitating them, so oftentimes it's not just us imitating their voice or behavior, we might also imitate an accent. And that is, again, one way of code switching, because the code that we are integrating into the main code is this quote. And of course, side comments when we want to, in our own monologue, when we want to do some side comments or utter something to ourselves, even with this very same swearing. This is how we tend to do it through another language. And the final 2 points in the pragmatic functions of code switching, which I would point out, are identity expression. So language obviously is something that we use for reflect our inner world and our thoughts and our background. So language can really reflect a lot more than we just say. It's a lot more complex than that. And through code switching, we can actually reflect our identity, that we belong to a certain group, that this is our ethnical background, that this is our view on something. And this is why there might have been a negative connotation around code switching overall, because some groups, a lot of groups actually, use this as a way to express that I am a minority, I am a part of this group. And you can also express group affiliation, of course. And around identity, we can also show our attitude, be it positive, be it negative, through these various linguistic expressive methods. We can show that how we feel about other groups. And the most fun way of the most fun reason for code switching is also language play. When we are creating puns, we're creating word games and constructing new words for fun reasons, depending on the context. This is also one way of code switching, and that's how slang is born. But despite the fact that we have so many categories and reasons why we do this, we should not forget that one code does not have just one association or function. One code often has more than that. So when we are doing this, when we are switching, we have to understand that there is more than one reason behind it. And these are just some of the categories, but overall we have to kind of analyze the context and the speaker and the situation and the topic, and by combining all of this together, we will have a bigger, better picture on interpreting the message and understanding how we understood it, and understanding how the speaker might have meant to express it. And I would look at 2 examples by the end of this. So one example of code switching comes from, both of these actually examples come from my data set. So here the first speaker says, me blandasime praegu rootsi ja eesti, and the other speaker says, ei, ma ei teinud, sina tegid. So in translation, this means we mixed now Swedish and Estonian. This is the direct translation. And the other speaker says, no, I didn't, you did. So in this case, blanda is the word that is not in Estonian. Blanda is the Swedish word. It's a verb. It means to mix or to blend. And the speaker wanted to express it in a fun way, that we are doing this thing with our language, we are mixing it, we're making new constructions. And in this single word, the blandasime, he is expressing the fact that he is using both Swedish and Estonian. And one category to put this in is obviously language play, but this can also be to express their identity, that, oh, I am not just an Estonian, I am a Swedish Estonian. I belong into this community, and that is why I have this linguistic capacity and the right to mix these 2 languages and create these constructions. And the other fun example I recall in a jam is, again, an interesting discussion between a boy and a girl. So the previous example was between 2 boys, but this is between a boy and a girl on berries. And they were discussing how different berries were called in Swedish. So I will start from the beginning. First, the speaker says, ei, kollased vaarikad, aga jortran. Meaning no yellow raspberries. After a small pause, they say, but cloudberries. Then the speaker their partner says, ei see pole, jah hjortron, mis on põld Mari-Liis, which means, no, it's not, yes, cloudberries, what's a blackberry then? Then the speaker says, those black raspberries, or in Estonian, need mustad vaarikad. And then the speaker, their partner says, aha, okay, björnbär. Oh, okay, blackberries. So they were discussing how do you say a cloudberry, how do you say a blackberry. In Swedish, they got very confused. And what I think is quite interesting is how they decide to describe both berries as through raspberries by saying those yellow raspberries or those black raspberries. So this is this shows in one way that we are semantically tied. We have this vocabulary limitation because we are so used to maybe talking about berries in this context in another language that we cannot access this. But it doesn't mean that they don't know. It's just because this can be tied to usage frequency, and if you're not using these type of words that frequently, then you might not remember them, even if the context allows us. So these are just some ways of analyzing a conversation. And I would highly, highly, highly suggest looking into more literature on this matter. So there is a lot of great books out there. Here's just a few of those that I have myself reviewed for my research. And definitely keep an eye out there for various approaches to analyzing code switching. But as an ending point to my long monologue, the question is, what do you get from this? What does it give you that you know why we code switch? So the obvious point, of course, is to understand yourself and understand why is it that you speak the way you do? Why is it that when you have so many options on self-expression, why is it that in this particular moment you do this subconscious choice? And maybe through analyzing this, you can continue making conscious choices and think through when it is maybe even appropriate to say something and what is limiting you or holding you back from expressing in a different way. And this is also a great background on understanding others and understanding why other communities talk the way they do. And it is so important to start recognizing the discrimination that certain groups have because they code switch, and stop this negative connotation and raise awareness that people do this all the time. This is normal, and it is not something that just specific groups do. This is something we all do, and we should be celebrating this this wonderful thing called language and how diverse it can be. In the language learning context, I believe this also allows us to self-analyze ourselves a bit better. So previously I mentioned that when I was learning Swedish, in the beginning, I learned to use it only in this linguistic context. And when I moved to Sweden, I had all of this struggle that I don't know how to order something. I can't even hold a basic conversation with a normal person. I didn't even know how to say vacuum in Swedish. And that gave me the understanding that I was used to learning it only in one topic and only in one situation, only with specific people, that I changed my overall approach to language learning. And I started learning more everyday vocabulary. I started talking more freely, not so formally, not so linguistically correctly. So it is something I would suggest to do, is to find this more specific angle when you are struggling. And of course, who am I not to say that please do research this. If you have an interest for linguistics and you would love to pursue a degree, maybe even in sociolinguistics, and you are maybe self-doubting, then please do so. The world needs more linguists. We need to understand more because there is so much happening in the world of language that we have not yet covered. And code switching, of course, is one of those. So this was the kind of conclusive point of my talk. I'm very grateful for anyone who has listened this towards the end. Again, very sorry that I'm not able to participate in a live discussion, but I will definitely keep an eye on questions out there. And if you feel like you want to reach out to me, if there is anything, any point which you agree or disagree with, or you want to continue this discussion, then I will leave my contact details. So feel free to reach out, and of course, enjoy the end of this wonderful event. I think there are so many wonderful talks today, and also from yesterday and before yesterday, that you should check out. So thank you, aitäh, and have a lovely conference.